Criminal Law Part 3, Crime and Elements of Crimes, Non-Homicide. Starting out, let's talk about larceny. What is larceny? Element 1, trespassery or unlawful. 2, taking and carrying away of the 3, property of 4, another, with 5, the intent to permanently deprive. The unlawful taking and carrying away of the property of another with the intent to permanently deprive. Taking and carrying away or asportation can be satisfied by some movement, even if the defendant designates an agent to do the movement. Any movement will be an asportation. The doctrine of continuing trespass in larceny states that if the defendant does not initially intend to steal, but later decides to keep the property, that gives us the intent for larceny. So the rule, trespassery or unlawful taking and carrying away of the property of another with the intent to permanently deprive. Taking and carrying away is some movement, even if the defendant designates, that's right, an agent. And the doctrine of continuing trespass, the defendant doesn't actually, that's right, intend to steal, but later they decide to keep. And that will satisfy intent for larceny. 2, larceny by trick. Same elements with an extra. The unlawful taking and carrying away of the property of another with the intent to permanently deprive. Last element, by false statement of material fact that induces reliance. The unlawful taking and carrying away of the property of another with the intent to permanently deprive by a false statement of material fact. So larceny by trick is obtaining possession by false statement. Contrast that to false pretenses, where the defendant acquires title to the victim's property by material false statement. Okay, so remember, it's easy to confuse larceny by trick, which is possession with intent to permanently deprive, versus false pretenses, acquiring title with a false statement. Larceny by trick, possession by false statement. False pretenses, title by false statement. Moving on to robbery. The unlawful taking and carrying away of the property from another's presence with the intent to what? Permanently deprive, and by force or threat of force. Do not shorten this definition of robbery. It is the unlawful taking and carrying away of the property from another's presence with intent to permanently deprive by force or threat of force. Why is this different? Remember, larceny can occur when the victim is not even there, whereas robbery involves a taking from the other's presence with force or threat of force. Robbery, what is it? The unlawful taking and carrying away of property from another's presence with intent to permanently deprive by force or threat of force. Okay, before we move on, the aggravated version of these crimes is usually the use of a deadly weapon. And by a deadly weapon, we do not always mean a gun, a hammer, a baseball bat, a knife. All of those things can be a deadly weapon. But use of the deadly weapon will allow those crimes to rise to the level of aggravated. Okay, now continuing with the theft crimes, false pretenses. Oh, one more thing. Sorry. Remember, crimes merge. Larceny, assault, and battery merge into, guess what? That's right, robbery, because they all have an element in common. Larceny, assault, and battery all merge into robbery. Larceny, assault, and battery merge into what? Robbery. Larceny, assault, and battery together, you've got a robbery. All right, moving on with the theft crimes. False pretenses. The defendant acquires, that's right, title to the victim's property by material false statement. False pretenses. What does the defendant acquire? Title to the victim's property, title to the car, title to the house by material false statement. Next up on the theft crimes, embezzlement. 3 elements. The defendant is in lawful possession of another's property. 2, fraudulently converts it to his own use. And 3, with intent to permanently deprive. Embezzlement, defendant is in lawful possession of another's property and fraudulently converts it to his own use. With 3, the intent to permanently deprive. Moving on, last theft crime, receiving stolen property. The defendant knowingly received possession or retained possession of property, 2, that the defendant knows or reasonably should know was stolen, with the intent to permanently deprive. Do not forget the intent element for the theft crimes. It is always intent to permanently deprive. Receiving stolen property. The defendant, that's right, knowingly received possession or retained possession of property that the defendant knows or reasonably should know was stolen. With what intent? That's right, to permanently deprive. Receiving stolen property can also be tied to the strict liability offense of continuing to hold. Okay, moving on. Burglary. The unlawful breaking and entering the dwelling of another with intent to commit a felony therein at the moment of entry. The night element is usually no longer a part of the modern law. So, unlawful breaking and entering the dwelling of another with intent to commit a felony at the moment of entry. Let's say that all in one sentence. Go for it. That's right. The unlawful breaking and entering of another's dwelling with intent to commit a felony at the moment of entry. Okay, what about a constructive breaking? That's tricking someone to get in, entering by making a false statement by fraud, or by exceeding the scope of consent. For example, by someone cracks the door and you force it open. That would be exceeding the scope of consent. But a constructive breaking is a trick or a false statement that allows the burglar to enter. That is a constructive breaking. Okay, kidnapping. Always, it is unlawful restraint and transporting or concealing a person through, that's right, force or threat of force with intent of recklessness or criminal negligence. So, what is recklessness? Failure to be aware of a substantial or an unjustified risk of harm. And criminal negligence, that's right, should have known of a substantial and unjustified risk of harm. What does false imprisonment merge into? That's right, it merges into kidnapping. So the crime of false imprisonment, the unlawful restraint, merges person is transported or concealed. All right, so kidnapping, unlawful restraint, transporting or concealing through force or threat of force with what intent? Recklessness or criminal negligence. Okay, let's go into assault and battery. You know this, assault is placing another in reasonable apprehension of imminent, unlawful bodily harm with at least recklessness or criminal negligence. Assault in criminal law can also be a failed or attempted battery. And of course, assault does what? It merges into battery. Okay, let's go over the elements again. Assault, placing another in reasonable apprehension of imminent, unlawful bodily harm with at least recklessness or criminal negligence. The other definition of assault in the criminal law is an attempted or failed battery. We attempt a battery or we fail a battery. That is assault. And what does assault do? It merges into battery the second there is a touching. Okay. Remember, these definitions are very similar to the tort definition. The difference is unlawful. So in tort, the definition of assault is placing another in reasonable apprehension of an imminent, harmful, or offensive bodily contact. Whereas in criminal law, we're placing another in reasonable apprehension of imminent, unlawful bodily harm with at least recklessness or criminal negligence or an attempted or failed battery. Okay, battery, an unlawful, harmful, or offensive contact. And what do you think our intent element is? Recklessness or criminal negligence. An unlawful, harmful, or offensive contact with at least recklessness or criminal negligence. Okay, so distinguish this from the tort definition. A harmful or offensive contact, and harmful meaning it causes some pain, and offensive meaning it offends a reasonable person's sense of personal dignity. Battery is the unlawful, harmful, or offensive contact with at least recklessness or criminal negligence. Okay, what's criminal negligence again? That's right, should have known of a substantial risk of bodily harm. Okay, moving on to rape. Sexual intercourse by force or threat of force without consent. And what do you think our intent element is? That's right, recklessness or criminal negligence. All right, a couple things. If the victim is intoxicated or unconscious, that will negate the force element. If the victim is unconscious, we don't need the force element. What about consent? One of our elements is without consent. What negates consent? Intoxication, some sort of mental deficiency, and the more force is used, the stronger the inference that the victim did not consent. So we don't need force or consent if the victim is intoxicated or unconscious. Okay, let's run through the elements one more time. Rape, sexual intercourse by, that's right, force or threat of force without consent with at least recklessness or criminal negligence. Okay, statutory rape, sexual intercourse with a person under the age of consent. What's not a defense? Consent. It is a, that's right, strict liability crime. Arson, The malicious burning of the dwelling house of another. Doesn't always have to be a home, can be a building, and sometimes is also expanded to land. Under the MPC, theft is a crime that encompasses larceny, larceny by trick, false pretenses, and embezzlement. MPC theft is theft by unlawful taking or disposition, and it includes 1, larceny, 2, larceny by trick, 3, false pretenses, and 4, embezzlement. That's our MPC theft. Thank you. Those are all of our common law crimes.